views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is a really good week to be buzzing because there's a lot to buzz about. And, you know, of course, when I host Bronx Talk, we do a lot of the debates and we talk about politics. And so why not, when we do the Bronx Buzz, bring in Bronx journalists and have them weigh in on what they think about some of the political issues that are going on, in particular, the fact that Tuesday is the primary and we have had quite a primary and campaign season here in the Bronx. So it is my pleasure to welcome, he's on the phone today because he's out there, I'm sure, running around chasing elected officials around like usual. Jarrett Murphy from City Limits, he's the editor over there. Nice to have you with us, Jarrett.
It's great to be on, Gary. Thanks for having me.
Great. Jarrett, as you know, I spent a lot of time working on Bronx politics and Bronx races, not as much time doing the city beat, and which you do. Talk to me a little bit about the debate between Mayor de Blasio and Sal Albanese. Do you have a winner in mind, or how would you evaluate what you saw? I guess it was last night, right?
It was last night. It was their second and final debate. Obviously, Albanese is one of four Democrats on the ballot in the Democratic primary next Tuesday challenging the mayor, but the only one who qualified for and was invited to both televised debates. I guess Mayor de Blasio won just because he didn't lose. You know, when you are an incumbent, when you're ahead in the polls, when you've got a ton more money than the other guy, much more name recognition, the debate really is, I think, chiefly viewed by political strategists and by the media too, as a chance for you to mess up, to say something stupid or contradict yourself or tell an untruth or say something offensive or whatever. And that didn't happen. To de Blasio. And in the second debate, more than the first, he seemed a little less on the defensive, so they actually seemed a little more confident. Albanese was also better in this debate, I thought. I think he was better at bringing up some real policy detail. You know, in the first debate, he specialized in and really honed in on the critique of de Blasio, the anger at him, the resentment of his style of leadership, his approach to having a national or international figure, all the knocks on him. Sal had those down, but really didn't have a good sense of his own kind of policy ideas, his alternative vision for the city. Last night, Albanese got to some of that. He was able to talk a little bit about how his approach to education would be different, got to talk about how his approach to homelessness and housing would be different. You know, on a couple matters, whether it's resiliency or terrorism, he didn't have much to go on, didn't have much to offer. But he was better. But, you know, nothing happened, nor did anybody expect anything to happen to really change the trajectory of the race.
The apparent trajectory of the race. You know, it has been said over the years that, you know, being mayor of New York City is the second toughest job in America. I can't evaluate whether it is or it isn't. Sometimes my job's pretty tough, too. But maybe not that tough. But Mayor de Blasio, on a daily basis, gets criticized, gets put in headlines of the tabloids, and even in you know, the Times and some of the, you know, the other media that's out there, as people don't like this, people don't like, obviously, the homeless and housing situation, the zoning plans, the affordable housing plans. He's ripped personally because they say that, you know, he's late for meetings. I mean, this is just an ongoing thing. And yet, there doesn't, your evaluation there and all the other evaluations that you read, there doesn't seem to be any suggestion that he is not going to win the race for re-election. And is that because you think there is not a really good field against him, or because he really is much more popular and it's just the media being the media?
I think it's a combination of things. I think one thing is that the mayor has been, you know, he has been successful. He did manage to, you know, keep crime down while reducing police intrusion into people's lives. He did start his pre-K program. There are a lot of reasons why test scores might be up in the schools, but test scores are up. The city has more private sector jobs than ever before. I don't know how much credit he deserves for that, but he takes it. So, the city is generally on a fairly decent course, and the mayor's actually going to get some credit for that. Also, he's a skillful politician. I mean, a year ago, they were beginning to line up union endorsements and kind of closing off the avenues for a potential challenge. And then there was this funny dynamic, too, of the potential indictment of the mayor.
Right.
And, he was investigated by both Cy Vance and also by federal prosecutors for a lot of different things involving his campaign finance. That was obviously not great for the mayor, but it had this funny effect of sort of freezing the field. A lot of people considered challenging him, but the narrative was basically that they were waiting to see if he would get indicted. And it took a long time for that to happen. And when it didn't happen, it was kind of too late to reconstitute.
Hard to get, yeah. You know what's interesting about that, and kind of my discussions on some inner political circles here in the Bronx, and using Borough President Diaz as an example, and I'm assuming Scott Stringer feels the same way. Why get involved in a fist fight, so to speak, a political fist fight right now, when if he does get reelected, you'll have an open seat, and then people like Scott Stringer and Ruben Diaz Jr. will have kind of an easier task of it, I think, if they really want to, kind of take.
No, you're totally right, Gary. This is a clear example of the impact of term limits. Why you have a job. Why challenge? If you're Tish James, if you're Scott Stringer, if you're Ruben Diaz, and that's going to make for a fairly quiet race, I think, this year, and a fairly interesting one in 4 years when all those people are looking for a job and de Blasio is out of one.
Yeah, you're an editor, but I'm going to edit your sentence. It's not going to be fairly interesting. I think it's going to be wild because these are all well-to-do, popular Democrats with good records in the city, with large followings. Just using the three names you mentioned, Borough President Diaz, Scott Stringer, and Letitia James, they're each of a different ethnicity, so you've got that if you want to measure that. They all will have records of success and critique and everything else. I think it'd be, just if that's what happens, one of the most exciting political seasons we may ever have, and certainly in the Bronx if our own borough president is involved. Let's talk about some of the races. Of course, we did the debate in the 13th Council District, which includes John Doyle, Marjorie Velasquez, Mark Jonai, Egidio Cementilli, Victor Ortiz, Alex Gomez, I think officially is still looking in from the outside. And I'm going to evaluate the debate that I did. I don't know if you saw it, but I felt that John Doyle made a tremendous presentation. But Mark Jonai basically was able to do what you said the mayor did, and that is not make a big mistake. So maybe Doyle won the thing, but he didn't get the knockout that he needed to unseat a perceived favorite. Your evaluation?
Yeah, I think I watched that debate too, and that's my diagnosis as well. I think it's just like a batter who knows what pitch is coming. Jonai understood that would be exactly the critique that would come his way. They trucked it out in other debates. It's an interesting critique. I think he's been dealing with that critique throughout his public life and knows how to rebut it, or at least to say enough to kind of neutralize it.
Yep.
But it is an interesting race. I mean, there's so much money. I mean, we call it this week on the site the $1 million council race, and it is extraordinary how much he has raised and how much he has spent in the contest. And so, it's legit that he gets questions about where that money comes from. And I think it's also important that toward the end of the debate, Doyle said he wasn't accusing Mark of being corrupt, just that he's a landlord. And that's the perspective he brings to this that has certainly shaped his legislative performance. And that is something that voters need to know, because landlords, especially in this day and age, that's not a value-neutral source of employment. And
the endorsements, the media endorsements, were not a slam dunk. John Doyle has been bragging about how he was endorsed by the Daily News, and that's interesting. I mean, we can go on about that race because it is fascinating, and the whole bit about people, being tossed off the ballot and then added. But let's move ahead, because that 14th council district with the incumbent of Fernando Cabrera is a very interesting race. My evaluation, if I can do my own debate, I thought that Randy Abreu made an excellent presentation. He wasn't flawless, but in terms of evaluating a young man who one would think has a future in Bronx politics, I thought Randy did very well. Whether he can win this or not, I don't know.
Yeah, so he makes a good presentation. I think, he has not, in questions that I've asked him and interactions I've seen, sometimes a depth of policy understanding is not there, but he clearly is in line with the more progressive slant of a good part of that district and of the West Bronx, where there's been this ongoing fight between the Gustavo Rivera faction and the Fernando Cabrera faction. Randy is clearly in that view. And also, I would say that the third candidate in the race, Felix Perdomo, clearly doesn't articulate himself as well as Abreu, but comes across as a very decent person.
Right, and he's down to earth, and he really is sincere about, you know what, I really want to help. And in some cases, that puts him ahead of others. Before we run out of time, I want to ask you a general question about who gets supported in the Bronx, in particular by the Bronx Democratic Party. I look at Randy Abreu and some of his values and the things that he talks about. I see that as matching up with many of the political clubs in the Bronx, like the Ben Franklin Club, and with the political profile of the people who run the Bronx County organization. Yet, that doesn't seem to matter. Like, they can't step back and evaluate the candidates. They just say, well, he's the incumbent. Is there a reason not to support him? I got to tell you, on this show, I could say it. Personally, I find that frustrating. I wish they would evaluate the candidates and support them based on whether they match up or not,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think that's a great point. And I think Abreu is one of the candidates who is going to force them to think about that, because, political organizations are about survival. And if Abreu can win without that support, if he can create a bypass to that, a new source of political power, that's a threat to the clubs and to the organization. And, throughout the history of the Bronx, whether it's back to Ed Flynn, the Bronx boss in the 30s and 40s, figuring out that a left-wing approach was what made sense politically and from a policy standpoint, and shifting the party to focus on that. Right. One wonders if the organization will kind of get the drift and shift their focus.
Well, I don't know if that will happen. They seem to be, and I actually spoke to a couple of current elected officials in the party, and they were pretty secure in wanting to support incumbents. And we got to go, but I got to tell you, and I won't tell you who told me this, but they said, you know what? Even though I'm not a particular fan of Reverend Diaz, and some of his things don't match up with mine, I like the idea that if he goes for the city council, it gets him out of the Senate, and that will improve what we're doing in the Senate. And I thought that was kind of an interesting perspective.
That is interesting. Very interesting.
Fascinating. Anyway, Jarrett Murphy, always great to talk to you. Next time we'll have you in here, but we appreciate you taking the time to be with us on the Bronx Buzz. And so thank you. And folks, check out City Limits. They're doing an unbelievable job at covering the Bronx. We will take a break, and we'll be right back.
Sure, I look cute now, but when my owner lost his job, it was rough. I was living on the street, and one night, me and this Cocker Spaniel got into it so bad, I wound up looking like an ice cream cone. I cried a little bit, but thankfully I got rescued, so I'm running, I'm jumping, all back to my old self. And I'm ready to give unconditional love, even if you put a lampshade on my head.
It's not always easy being a dad.
Do you have panda asthma too? Does that run in the family? This is the home of the most priceless kung fu artifacts.
But when you make an effort,
Dad, we're not supposed to touch anything. Oh, sorry. Go long, son.
it's always worth it.
Whoa, master!
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
I am gonna get you. I'm gonna get you.
Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov to learn more.
Hamilton was adopted from a rescue in 2008. He really likes to be around people. And as soon as I start to make my breakfast, Hamilton is right there. I get out my mat and I'm doing a downward dog and he's underneath. He's quite the pug about town. He gets invited to a lot of parties. He knows he's a pretty big deal. I mean, look at this little face. How could you not love him?
Hey, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. We are heading right into primary season or primary election day because it is on this Tuesday. We've had a very, very active primary season here in the borough of the Bronx with I moderated debates on BronxNet television, and a lot of people saw them, and the dialogue is going everywhere. There are a lot of forums and things going on. It is my extreme pleasure to bring in a former Assembly member who is now on the editorial board of the New York Post, longtime colleague Michael Benjamin. Nice to have you with us, Michael.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Great. Michael, just your impression. I know you're kind of like a fan of politics and these kinds of campaigns. What's your impression of just overall about the tenor of what's gone on here in the Bronx as far as the council races that are being campaigned for?
I think the tenor has been generally very good in the very competitive districts, like in the districts where you have Randy Abreu and Mr. Perdomo and council member and then the incumbent Fernando Cabrera. I believe that's District 14 are contending. You have that very crowded field, I guess two crowded fields up in the 13th where they're running to fill the vacant seat created by the term limits on Jimmy Vaca, where you have Assemblyman Mark Jonah, you've got Doyle, you've got Velasquez.
Yeah, there's a lot of kind of high-profile community people, and frankly, as somebody who moderates the debates, I much would prefer to have people who have some credential, have some experience, so they can really discuss issues. I'm going to agree with you. I think it's been a very interesting season, and one thing I will congratulate almost all the candidates on, there have been many forums, and it's really, I think, energized the public, and I'd like to see more than 3,000 people per district come out and vote.
And that's really what we need to draw voters out the field. They have a choice in electing people who represent them, their interests, and what they want to see done in city government. I think that's important. And you can have it in a race that isn't much of a race. Salamanca's race was running against Helen Hines again. I mean, that's not really a contest. But Ms. Hines is running again. She raised some money, and so there'll be a contest there.
Yep. I want to talk to you about the 18th Council District, and this is where Senator Reverend Ruben Diaz Sr. is seeking that seat. But a very competitive race and very qualified people like Elvin Garcia. I thought the emergence of Amanda Farias on the political scene was very interesting to me. What are your thoughts about that particular race? Is the senator a slam dunk here, despite the fact that
only because the senator is. I think he's a shoo-in to win. Not only because it's a very crowded field, which will sort of split up the anti-Diaz vote. He's also very well known, and he has a base. And once you have that base, you just build upon the rest of it to win in this huge field that includes another contender. Michael Belzer. He has.
Yes, I'm sorry. Apologize to Michael because I should have mentioned him. Go ahead, Michael. I'm sorry.
He put himself quite well. You got William Moore, who's more of a gadfly and troublemaker than anything else. But under the law, they can run. They've got their constituencies, and we'll see what happens. But I think, impressed that we have Belzer, we have Amanda Farias, and we have Elvin Garcia, which means that I think the future of politics in the Bronx is pretty good. Whatever happens, I think that they'll be in it for the long haul. I think that's good for the future. Reverend Diaz, won't, he'll be term limited in 4 to 8 years. And then they've got their shot again if they want for city council or other offices. I mean, if Diaz wins, he opens up the Senate seat, and then you have possible opening up an assembly seat for more races. We'll see where things go. But I think it's important that you have young people running for office. The same with in the 13th, you have Velasquez running. That's important. And the thing I think I criticized in the New York Post New York Post column was the lack of the party supporting new women for the seat.
You did pull that out. That's right.
And I think it's important. I mean, I got criticized because when I ran, I replaced a woman, Gloria Davis. But the thing was, I replaced her because she wanted me to. She moved my house during reapportionment into her district so I could run eventually for her seat. She may have changed her mind, but I was put in there by her because she saw me as a possible successor.
Well,
so
you know,
I wasn't running to.
Michael, it's really interesting to hear you mention that. I mean, I don't know that I've really heard that direct
the Bronx
information about it.
Democrats threw that back at me.
Yeah, well,
Oh,
I was aware of that criticism, but I want to raise something, and I just raised it previous to this phone call with Jarrett Murphy of City Limits, and that is kind of the knee-jerk reaction of the Bronx established party to support people who are incumbents, even though Reverend Diaz is not an incumbent in this particular race. Same thing with Mark Jonai in the 13th. There are candidates there, Amanda Farias, Elvin Garcia, Randy Abreu. I mean, we've mentioned these names, Michael Belzer. These are people who I think their values and their vision of the Bronx and their vision of government aligns itself with many more of the elected officials who are in the Bronx County organization than maybe Reverend Diaz does. And yet, the county organization always goes with the incumbent. Frankly, it's frustrating to me when I see young people who deserve an opportunity. I don't know how you get in, you know?
Part of it is that the party is, in a sense, conservative. In fact, they go with the people whose names they know and the people who they evaluate could win the seat again. Diaz, Jonai, they have no names. The same thing with Assemblyman Rodriguez running in the 8th for the vacancy created by Mark Viveritos, being term limited. They are three known people in their districts who are known vote getters. The party wants to always play it safe, so you go with the known vote getters who can get you across the finish line with the people you know.
Yeah. You know what else, Michael? Let me just interject one thing about that. Also, I have this sense that they feel like if I don't support that incumbent, maybe one day they won't support me, so we better not play that game of really evaluating challengers because I could be the next one who's evaluated out of the party. So I think there's this kind of regeneration that they're going for to keep, frankly, themselves in office.
Well, but also you did have some members of the party who supported Councilman Cabrera when he challenged incumbent Senator Rivera.
That's
Gustavo
true.
Rivera.
Yeah. Although
may not have good relations with the party organization, which leaves them open to challenges from other electeds who want to challenge him or anybody else who the county would support over him. So you do have those sort of things playing in there. And all in my 30, 40 years, or over 30 years in Bronx politics, it's always been about supporting the folks who you work with and you know well, and in a sense rewarding them with the support to run for office. And I couldn't deny that in my own run for the assembly for the first time, as after 20 years of working in a party, it's sort of my turn, and I had acquitted myself, I thought, quite well in the previous city council election, which made me sort of a good candidate to replace Gloria Davis in the assembly when that seat opened up.
Just going back, since you had brought up that editorial, do you regret writing that, or you pretty much still stand by what you had said about support?
Of course not. I don't regret writing it.
I forgot who I was talking to. I'm sorry.
It's important for women to run. I thought it would have been important for the party to send a signal that in at least one of those districts they would find it okay. They would find a woman to support, so that the Bronx doesn't lose some female representation down at city council. I mean, because we're going to go from 4 women at one point to now possibly definitely only one, assuming the other women won't win. Don't win next week. So Vanessa Gibson being the only female in the Bronx delegation. She will be the delegation leader because she'll have the most seniority. I mean, maybe that's good for women.
Wait, who is it that we're talking about?
Vanessa Gibson.
Oh, Vanessa Gibson, of course. Although Fernando Cabrera was talking about in the debate that I held that he was going to be the most senior member. I'm not aware of the particulars. I'd have to look that up.
Yeah, I might have my dates mixed up as to who replaced whom.
Right.
I forget. It may well be him. He's right, because he did replace Adolfo, I think.
Yeah.
And
actually, that does fit into the prior dialogue that we had about always supporting incumbents or people that they know. Did you think it was interesting that the borough president did not support Robert Rodriguez, who was one of his colleagues when he was in the assembly, and also he went over to support Diana Ayala?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I thought it was important, and possibly the right thing for him to do is to support a woman for the council, and also sort of show, I guess, critics and others outside the borough that he can be independent of the Bronx Democratic County Organization in selecting candidates who he deems to be qualified to run and represent a particular neighborhood, particular community. In this case, in the 8th, and Diana Ayala, being a Bronx resident, in his mind, being qualified, and wanted to also have, I think, a Bronx resident representing that council district.
Right. And he may have, in fact, I believe that there's going to be an announcement tomorrow of a project he's working on with the speaker. And so, he may have not wanted to do anything to get in the way of that. Last question.
I heard that. I heard that, but I didn't have it as a fact. So I let it go.
All right, fair enough. And let's just, real quick, we got about a minute, talk about the mayor's race. I mentioned to Jarrett Murphy that Mayor de Blasio gets criticized, gets ripped for some, things that people really are unhappy about. The homeless situation, the affordable housing situation, his own ethics. I mean, this stuff is front page news in your paper and the Daily News and really all over the place, and a lot of the blogs. And yet, everybody walks around saying, you know what, he's automatically going to win. It's a done deal. What's your thought on the mayor's race?
Well, because he's a name they know, the name voters know. Voters seem to be well disposed towards him. Sal Albanese, I happen to personally like. I think some of his ideas are really good, but he hasn't raised the money to make himself a bigger profile, be a bigger name across the boroughs. The turnout's probably going to be small to see the vote, I think, for mayor, and it favors the mayor, who then also, in my view, went overboard in accepting and wanting $2.6 million in public dollars in a race that he's dominating with, and he didn't need the money. To me, that was unfair, and that was just piling on Albanese and the other candidates who were running in the primary. I think that the mayor should have shown, a little more, decency in campaign, and not wanting to wipe everybody out. They're taking public dollars at the same time.
Michael, we got to run, but I'm going to leave you with a similar thought that I said to Jarrett Murphy. If, in fact, things go as many people do expect that they will go, and Mayor de Blasio does get reelected, 4 years from now, when Ruben Diaz Jr., Scott Stringer, Letitia James, and maybe others might want to seek the mayor's seat, we're really going to have a time in this city. It's going to be very interesting for political pundits, I'll tell you that.
Oh, no, it'll be just like 2013. When you had a slew of people running for mayor.
That's
like
right.
8 or 9, I think it was.
Michael, it's always great talking politics and talking anything with you. Thanks for your time today or tonight, and we will catch you around town once again.
Yeah, Gary, thank you. Oh, congratulations on This Is the Bronx.
Oh, thank you very much. We appreciate it. We're working real hard at it. Thank you. All right, folks, that is our show for today. We had two excellent political commentators, and guess what's going to happen? Next week, we'll have more. We'll see you next week. Good night.